We are on indigenous territory that has never been ceded by way of treaty. We are in a place that is the cradle of Haudenosaunee culture, called Jojage Inganyengeha and Muniang in Anishinaabe-Mowin, that has long been a place of encounter between First Nations. It is now also known as Montreal. This theatre is built on land that has its own history since time immemorial, that already carried its own stories, rituals, and performances before colonization. We are grateful for the vitality and resurgence of the art forms inherited from these ageless practices. Enjoy the festival.
So welcome everybody at our last live stream of this Atelier Montreal. But we will still be here until the 7th with everybody to think through the questions that have been raised with all these panels. So today we have a fantastic panel with Kee Hong Low, Christine van Winkle, Anna Gallagher-Ross, Quito Tembe, Nayse López, and again facilitated by Mike Van Graan. The floor is all yours.
Okay, so welcome everybody, and this afternoon's discussion is around what COVID-19 has done to our sector, festivals, the art sector generally, and the like. And so for us to have a little bit of a discussion about the good, the bad, and the never to be repeated again. So not everything about the impact of COVID on the sector was bad. There were ways in which we as a sector were forced to be innovative and think out of the box and come up with new ways of responding to what the crisis meant for us. And we are creative people, and that's what we are required to do. So we're going to be sharing some of those stories with you today, and again, like it to be very much an interactive session with you. And so we're going to be starting with our two new folk, and maybe give over to Anna, and then go to Christine, and then Kee Hong, Quito, and final speaker will be Madame Sofia Loren from Brazil. Sorry, that was our internal joke from lunch. Please, Anna.
You wash your hair, people think you're a different person.
I wash my hair and I am.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, everyone. My name is Anna Gallagher-Ross. And quite appropriate to this panel, I'm actually recovering from COVID-19. So I apologize if I cough. I am testing negative, just to reassure everyone. But if I do struggle a little bit, today, it is because of that. But I'm grateful to be here. I'm coming here today from Toronto, where I am the senior manager of programming at the Bentway Conservancy. We're a public space that is located underneath the Gardiner Expressway, which is an elevated highway deep in the heart of Toronto. We offer year-round arts and culture programming for free to audiences. And we operate, I want to say, on the treaty lands of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the traditional lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis, as well as other indigenous nations. So our work at the Bentway is seasonal. As I said, we do offer both arts and culture programming. We really see these as crucial to sort of the health of our communities that we serve. But we also partner with artists to imagine other types of public space across the city of Toronto and use their artistic projects in collaboration with them as ways to demonstrate the potential of public space. In addition, up until last year, I was actually co-artistic director of Fusebox Festival based in Austin, Texas. We were, I'm getting so down already because of the COVID pandemic talk. We are an international performing arts festival that is free entirely to attend and brings artists from all over the world to Austin each year. So just to position myself, I am a very, up until recently, festival leader. As well now, I am a sort of curator and head of programming of a public space. So wanted to begin actually by reading something to you, if that's okay. I'm very low tech here. I wanted to begin by reading some words by my colleague Shanta Thack. Shanta is the Chief Artistic Officer at the Lincoln Center in New York. And these words are an inspiration to me and I think came to mind immediately in thinking about the subject that we are discussing today. And feel free to close your eyes if you want to listen that way. It's sometimes nicer. What if anything is possible? What if our home is in the theater? What if these dark rooms have allowed us to be free from the tyranny of the mundane, have cleared our minds and opened our hearts? What if these dark rooms of waiting, where our friendships formed, our drinks overflowed, and our open hearts broke, suddenly became dangerous? What if the way that we cared and created empathy vanished in an instant? Would we find it in a Zoom waiting room? Would we recreate in our streets in protest marches and banners? Or would we simply crawl further into ourselves and away from one another? What, if anything, is possible? Performance lives for so many of us in the moments where we see and are seen, where we feel and are felt. We have created and we have observed and we have waited. Yet, we are in the waiting, reckoning with the realities of when, where, and how curated performance palaces have been blind and unfeeling, where our intentions have been wholly separate from our impact. What, if anything, is possible? What if you never felt cared for or seen by live performance? What if our cutting-edge curation, our form-destroying festivals, our seasons of brave new work have never spoken to you or about you, but instead made it clear that we don't want you around? Made it clear by the signals of our unspoken rules, our drink minimums, our ticket prices, and our inability to imagine a world that could include your story? What if that exclusion was the point? Anything is possible. So much lost in the waiting, so much revealed, so much undone, so much planted. What beckons us from this stage? What must we create in this present to take care of one another in a new way? Can theater not be dragged down by its logistics, its unending waste, its determination to prioritize a singular narrative, its partnership with white supremacy? Can theater move into a moment, a movement? Someday the curtain will rise and who we are in this present will be on full display. What did we make? For whom? As we redefine space and time as a human collective, can we reimagine how to create a sustainable artistic community that understands how to build care for one another into the process and make that process of creation a sacred breath? Anything is possible. So these are words by Shanta Thack. They come from an issue of an online journal called Imagine Theaters, which I was a guest editor of back in 2020. Kee Hong was actually a fabulous contributor to that issue. This was an issue where we asked curators across the globe to respond about their ideas about the future of performing arts. We actually commissioned these pieces in 2019, but then they came to fruition, many of them, in 2020, which was, as you can imagine, a very strange time to be contemplating the future of the field, as Shanta was at that time. So I wanted to begin with Shanta's words because they were written in that summer of 2020, and to me, they really capture the good, the bad, and the ugly about our field. Her words came to mind in thinking about the title of this conversation, as I said, The New Abnormal. As she points out, though, the normal, commonly referred to as the before times by many of us, was not a good norm. In fact, it was normative. It was exclusionary. It was unsustainable, quite frankly. We carried on in so many ways as though the art system was not broken and not in need of repair or renovation. And I think that the pandemic laid bare truths that for a long time we tried to ignore, and in that pause we finally could not look away from. Certainly, we saw how unsustainable the arts field, especially the performing arts, was, and how we needed to better support the ecosystem of arts workers, many of whom are precariously employed still. And due to this precarious employment and lack of support structures, it was sad to see in the two contexts I was working in the US and in Canada, a mass exodus from the field, just due to burnout, but also due to it being economically not viable for them to continue. I am grateful that there were dialogues that were ignited about this precarity and which sought to start to concretely address the inequities in the field. Basic things that our field was unfortunately not aware of, such as how to compensate art workers fairly, how to restructure contracts in a spirit of ethical transparency and practice, how to start to decolonize our processes of working, how to lead with care and support in a sustainable fashion, and to prevent from burnout as the operative mode. I hope that this flame of advocacy continues to burn at organizations, institutions, and governments, and that they learn how to better and resource and support the arts. I've been excited to see, small models emerge where you see certain art centers taking artists on a salaried basis with benefits. Think of the art that can be made with a salary and benefits. Seeing cities across the US pilot universal basic income for artists. These are all tiny, small, micro actions, but they are inspiring to contemplate. I saw for the first time during this time a louder call for these issues facing arts workers to be linked to a larger struggle for social welfare everywhere. That issues in other sectors that are facing other sectors such as education, universal basic income, healthcare, parental leave, are issues of arts workers as well as all workers. As we all know as well, it was not just COVID-19 that was a pandemic we were contending with at that time. There was also another pandemic that plagued us and has historically and was brought to an acute fervor during the pandemic, which is that of systemic racism. During this time, it was made clear, as Shanta puts it, that we were in partnership with white supremacy and that the structures and systems within our arts organizations needed to be renovated or abolished altogether in favor of new models of leadership, new forms of governance, and the reallocation of resources, as well as considering multivocal modes of curation and new forms of governance that create and ensure a diversity of voices on stage as well as off stage. Accessibility was also a crucial learning for our field during this time, how to go beyond compliance and actually build that into the foundation of our work. The last organization that I ran, Fusebox, we had a free festival, but we always said that you can make a festival free to attend, but it doesn't actually make it accessible. There are so many barriers to access that go beyond the ticket price. The way our spaces are coded, the partnerships that you form, the way in which you make invitations to audience. What if, as Shanta put it, previously exclusion had been the point? So at Fusebox, we were one of the first festivals actually to go online, crazy as we were. Our festival pivoted from a festival we had been planning for 2 years in April 2020 to put on an entirely new, reimagined virtual festival in just 4 weeks. And as we were doing this, we became acutely aware that so many of the accessibility provisions we were building into this work were things that had been called on to us for so long and that we just had not listened to previously. We realized in creating these live streaming opportunities and otherwise that we were inviting not only people from around the world into our festival, but people living in our city who were not able to attend for the first time. It also enabled us to, create really intimate and incredible glimpses into the work of our artists. I think one of the most exciting things at our virtual festival was the ability to go on location to Tokyo and show audiences an artist's studio and where they make work. Some of these were some of the most exciting learnings for us at that time. But we were also able to contextualize our work in new ways, to create a new interactivity with our audiences, to spark dialogues and to connect people. It also led us to learn about a rich field of virtual performance that had existed long before our experiments in that space. It taught us to think and consider what it means to be live online, actually. And I really have come to think of the online realm after these 2 years as a venue, and one that can continue to complement and augment and enhance the in-person work that we do. Finally, I'm grateful that we've actually started to talk more about the impact that our touring and our travel has on the planet, and wanting us to be more intentional about how we are structuring those activities. But hand in hand with that, I think that what is so crucial more than ever is international exchange, actually, is the free exchange of ideas across borders. As we've seen due to the pandemic, due to so many world events, we've seen borders close. And I think, all the while acknowledging what a privilege it is to travel and to be able to obtain a visa. So I am just so impressed and so excited about the network that you all are forging, because I think it is vital to us continuing to create festivals together. I love the idea of us having satellite curator contacts all over the world that we can be consulting with about work, bringing new perspectives to bear on the way we put together festivals. I can call Kee Hong and ask what's happening in Manchester, but also all the other places that Kee Hong is connected to. And you know, I think at home, in the creation of our festivals at a very fundamental level, we are realizing how much we need to be thinking about sustainability. We need to be thinking about reducing the waste in our work. We need to be thinking about innovative ways of upcycling and reusing, reducing our carbon footprint, and being in a more meaningful relationship to place at every turn. I think that this time has, I hope, reaffirmed why we love liveness, the live experience, and the function that art has as a social infrastructure to bring us together, to support our gathering. But I would also say, as Shanta says, we need to be attentive and vigilant that we align our intentions with our impact. As she says of the pandemic time, so much is lost in this waiting, so much revealed, so much undone, but so much planted. Now it's up to us to imagine what's possible together. Thank you.
Great, Anna. Thank you for a very stimulating, passionate introduction to this afternoon's session. Great way to start. Christine.
Thank you, and thank you so much. First of all, I want to say what a pleasure it is to be here. I haven't had an opportunity to meet many of you yet, but I hope I will over the course of the rest of the day. I'm coming to you here from the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, which is in the center of Canada. And our university is located on Treaty 1 territory, the homeland of the Anishinaabe, Dene, Cree, Oji-Cree, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. And at the University of Manitoba, I'm a professor in the Faculty of Kinesiology and Recreation Management, which in venues like this sometimes gets an eyebrow raised because people are trying to figure out how phys ed and biomechanics relate to festivals, and they don't, or I haven't figured it out yet. My background is in leisure studies and recreation management, and then I did a PhD in parks, recreation, and tourism management. And at our university, we teach that content within the context of recreation management. So I teach tourism, event management, cultural tourism, and so on. And then I get encouraged to try and exercise once in a while by my colleagues. So as well as working at the University of Manitoba, I'm an adjunct faculty member at Royal Roads University in British Columbia, where I mentor graduate students. And as well as that, I'm an associate editor of a number of event and festival-related journals. And I share that with you because I have the privilege of getting the opportunity to spend a lot of my time reading research and a lot of my time exploring the research that is coming out in the festival and event world. And that is how I ended up choosing to become a professor. I had been working in festival organizations for many, many years. I worked at the Winnipeg Fringe Theatre Festival as a festival coordinator, then supervisor, and then consultant. And I loved my work with the Winnipeg Fringe. It's one of the largest fringes in North America and is often a mentor to many of the other fringe festivals. And so it was an incredible experience. But what I found fascinating in that time was how fly by the seat of our pants we were in so many aspects of running the event. And I became so curious about so many different aspects of event management and decided to go back to school and really wanted to understand from an academic perspective what was going on in the realm of festivals. And so I've continued to maintain relationships with the Winnipeg Fringe, but also served on the board of the Winnipeg International Comedy Festival and have worked with festivals across Canada and the world looking at various aspects of research. And that's what I'm going to talk with you about today, is some of the research that we've been doing. And you'll have to bear with me. I want to share with you some quotes from research, so I am going to look down at a screen in order to quote people accurately. But to give you a bit of context, in February of 2020, I had a research project, a funded research project, to look at emergency management and planning in festival organizations. And the project was going along swimmingly. We were about to start data collection in March, and then the pandemic happened. And as you all likely experienced, the work that we were doing no longer seemed very relevant or meaningful or doable. And I was working with graduate students trying to figure out how we might best move forward. And we were getting a lot of calls from the media at that time to comment or write pieces on how this was going to affect festivals. But as you all know, nobody knew. We didn't know. Festivals weren't sure how things were going to play out and so on. And so at that moment, we decided to transition, and we had this funding, and we were so lucky to have funders that supported us, and we were able to explore how festival organizations were coping with the pandemic. And we were able to do this over the course of the pandemic. So what was fantastic is we weren't just looking at one moment in time. We sent out a call to festival organizers across Canada, the United States, and Mexico in March 2020, when life was pretty overwhelming. And we were humbled by the response we got. We actually had to stop recruiting people to participate in our study because of the overwhelming response. And in the end, we had 49 festivals participate in our study. And we interviewed them at two moments in time. We interviewed them in those first months of the pandemic, and then we interviewed them a year later. And we were interested in exploring two things. The first was understanding how festival organizers were dealing with uncertainty. And we were looking at that under a theoretical umbrella, as academics do, of something called uncertainty management. And we looked at the differences in the countries, but also at different genres of festivals, so theater, film, music, comedy, literary, every genre of festival, food, we tried to include in the study. And we also looked cross-culturally, so differences in how things were unfolding in Canada, the US, and Mexico. So the first study looked at this idea of how people cope with uncertainty. And what uncertainty management theory really tells us is that people first need to define what the uncertainty is. We all face uncertainty every day, but what do we define as uncertainty? And then what the theory talks about is that we make appraisals. We make judgments about uncertainty. It's good, it's bad, it's neither. And those judgments deeply affect how we behave. So if we judge uncertainty as a threat and feel really negatively about it, we're going to make certain choices. Whereas if we see the hope in uncertainty, we're going to make other choices. And so we explored this with these festival organizers who were so gracious and gave us so much of their time talking with us, sometimes for well over an hour. I think they were keen to have someone to talk to about some of the things they were going through, as you'll see from some of the quotes I have. So I'm not going to get into the whole model and theory piece. What I want to do is share with you what they said. And so I'm going to read you some of the quotes. So with regards to uncertainty, one of the main things influencing festival organizers' feelings of uncertainty was how government and public health organizations were responding. And you all probably experienced that as well. Here's one example from one senior festival administrator. Being one of the first events that have to navigate that, it feels really scary. It really feels heavy. And then another festival organizer said, once we know what the rules are, it will be much easier to go ahead. And these themes were common throughout. People felt scared, but they also felt like they just wanted to know what was expected of them. That if someone would make that call, they could then go forward and plan whatever it is they could plan. Another factor that affected how they managed uncertainty was their stakeholders. One festival founder said, the team feels connected and feels acknowledged in the work that we do. We've had so much support that helps us to work with others and engage with others. Another festival organizer commented, we have no clue how they will react. Someone will be angry. There's so much conflict. And we really saw a lot of differences here between the different countries and what was happening in terms of consistent messaging from public health and government. We found that in the United States, what was happening is there was so much conflict over the pandemic and how one should respond, that was filtering down to the festival organizations, who then struggled to make sure they were meeting the needs of their publics. Whereas in Canada, the concern was more about clarity. It was less about the conflicts and more about, we just need to know what's expected of us. A fourth theme that we found was the uniqueness of the festival really played a very important role in how uncertainty was felt. So for example, an organizer of a comedy festival in Canada commented, comedy without laughter, it's just not the same. It loses some of its joy. And then a film festival organizer commented, it's frustrating. People think we can just go online, but we can't. We don't have the rights to do that. And there are many, many other examples of the unique aspects of the festivals that were challenges faced by the organizer. Finally, sociocultural contexts in which the festivals were organized also made a big difference to festival organizers. And they commented on things like, I worry about our performers. We need to make sure they can make it through this. They wanted to ensure the cultural integrity of their communities and that at the end of the pandemic, they would have well-supported performers that could continue to participate in the festival. Finally, time was a really important part of uncertainty. And there's a theory that goes along with this one too. Construal level theory talks about how when uncertainty is close by, we tend to focus on really tangible, specific tasks, concrete things that need to be done. Whereas when something's in the distant future, we think more abstractly about it. And what we found is that the festival organizers, for many reasons, who had events coming up, they were very focused on those concrete pieces and had a much more negative perception of uncertainty. Whereas the festival organizers who had months to plan saw things in more abstract ways and felt more positivity around their ability to adapt and change. And that was a real strong feeling across all of the festivals. If I have a few more minutes, I want to share a little bit more from the second half of the study, because the first part really looked at the emotional response to uncertainty and how festivals were coping. And we did find that over time, as uncertainty was reduced, or adapted to, that their level of positivity around what was possible could change, and changed over that time. But what else was really interesting is we at that point started to see shifts in the overall festival business models. And some of you may have found this with your own events. We saw quite major shifts in how organizations were moving forward and how they structured their organization. And we found kind of 4 major areas that organizations were changing: sustainability, innovation, community and relationship building, and adaptability. And again, I want to share with you one quote from each, and then I'll wrap it up. So one festival organizer commented, "We're just going from one event to another, busy all the time. But this pandemic is giving us time to slow down and reflect and clean up. And it's actually going to give us extra time to plan a really nice 10th anniversary and just take a breath and evaluate." So we are, well, me personally, I do not know about the rest of the team, but I'm quite happy for this pause. And so we found that festivals were either just trying to weather the storm, or they were taking the opportunity to grow as an organization. Another festival organizer, when they commented on opportunities to innovate, they said, "I think we will be able to go ahead in some form, and it could be a completely different festival, but the core will still be there. I think most of our content would work online quite well. I've done enough Zoom workshops. Like, I've seen what works well and what doesn't work. So I think what we would try is to create the best practice playbook for a festival. And then I think our focus should be really on doing the work up front so that content is truly the very best it can be." And this highlights that idea of innovation adoption, taking on something new that already exists, but also innovation generation. They want to create the playbook for how to do this well, which was really inspiring. In terms of community building and relationship building, one festival organizer commented, "And I think the big part of this is because, as I said, I have been on weekly calls with festivals from across Western Canada. So it's been great to sort of connect me deeply to a lot of my colleagues and getting guidance from them." And many festival organizers talked about the fact that they had never talked to the other festivals in their own community ever before prior to the pandemic, unless it was something that was required of them. And that was something that was really special and that they desperately hoped they would be able to continue doing. And then finally, adaptability. One festival founder commented, "That just doesn't make sense for us to kind of self-announce some grand plan. We don't have a plan. We're just like every other festival in the world that's monitoring the situation, seeing how it's going to affect them." And so festival organizers had to remain very flexible, but what was really interesting is the ones who were very positive about their experience and able to move forward were very transparent with their uncertainty. They were open with their staff, with their stakeholders, and with their community, and they seemed to feel that that was what was getting them through. I'll leave you with one final quote from a festival organizer who talked about how you never could have expected the pandemic would happen, but now that they look back on it, they felt like they should have known. I wish we had a plan, and now we do. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Great, Christine. A lot of the people here are festival makers, as are the people on the panel. It's always so good to have an academic, a researcher in the room, someone who can provide us with an overview that looks at all of our festivals and others and reflects that back to us. So that was really useful. Thank you.
One thing I will comment. I will say one thing. I did include a slide package that is available to you, just summarizing some of this. Cool,
fantastic. Thank you. Kee Hong.
Super, thank you. Thank you, Anna and Christine, for, I think, two bookends of a frame that it's kind of super to begin this afternoon. One that it's kind of anchored in analysis, in kind of thought processes, and also examples that some of us may not encounter in our different interactions. And for Anna to begin, I think an important provocation, to think about what if, to think about what is actually possible. And so for me, I choose today not to talk about the not so good and the never to be repeated, because it's we have a collective lived experience of what that looks like. So perhaps it's, I think, more important to spend this moment to celebrate all the good that has come out of the last 2.5 years. And this collective sharing of good is what will be the mana that will keep us going in the future that is to come. I mean, we've heard some examples of the good from a very personal level. Obviously, the moment to be able to slow down, to take a breath, to reconnect, whether you choose to or not, with your body that is probably failing because we are in a business that it's always in the throes of, at high intensity, high stress level, and never caring about ourselves. So the pandemic has taught us about self-care before caring for someone else. It's like on a plane, right? If something happens, you put the mask on yourself and the next person. But we never remember this. So do not forget. The other thing that I've kind of experienced and I've learned that something that I want to hold on to is the idea of the new radical. Is the idea of speculative futures that it's able to allow us to journey in territories which we never thought was possible, that we never thought was imaginable, all because we never had an image that was possible to hold on to, a set of vocabulary or language or ways of saying and articulating and naming that was not present before. So this moment of the new radical allowed us to wander into areas that we never had time for, into sections of knowledge systems that we never thought that could be relevant to what we do. This included stuff around botany, around mushrooms, around mycelial network, around sourdough, baking, around cultivating your own starter, to caring for plants that will not survive the summer. These sets of different knowledges informed a lot of my curatorial practice. I took directly from dealing with how to make my sourdough starter stronger into thinking about radical curatorial practices that could survive anything. Yeast is one hardy bitch, yeah? And I love them for it. So I lucked my two very different sourdough yeast, dehydrated them on the plane with me when I moved to Manchester. They're still dehydrated. I'm waiting for a moment to wake them up. but they're hardy bitches. But they have taught me so much about resilience. They've taught me so much about tenacity. And they've taught me so much about not being able to eat anything, but yet blooming into such perfume that I've never experienced sitting in my fridge. In many ways, these radical, or the new radical that I talked about, is also the moment, as we heard earlier today in the previous panel, about radical rethinking about the institution. In the last 5 years, and this predated the pandemic, and when I was based in Hong Kong, there was also the other layer of the demonstrations, the protests, the political trauma that we all went through, and they all informed also very much about thinking this new radical. That in a way, institutions as we know them basically are out of date. Institutions that we are all complicit with are out of date. And obviously, these institutions and these people who are in positions of power are clinging desperately to what is of the old because they are afraid. They are afraid that one day we will rule the world. They're afraid that one day they're going to fuck off and that nobody will care about them. They're afraid that one day their legacy will be forgotten. But in a very ironic way, a lot of their legacy sits within our bodies. We have been colonized in many different ways, and we demonstrate a lot of that legacy. So maybe the new radical is about rethinking what does this legacy mean for the next generation. So in thinking about where we are right now, let's not forget. Let's not forget everything that we have learned, everything that has allowed us to think beyond what we thought was scary, was not possible, but to know that actually we are in this together. We are stronger together, and we are far more powerful than we think we are. So never, never forget that actually we're not alone. So there's always so much good that's come out in these 2.5 years. And I only choose to rest in a place to say that I want to remember this for many, many years to come, because what I'm looking at right now is the new radical. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. It's very inspiring to hear how we rethinking to be here in Hertz and doing what we're doing. I think it's real touchful, because I got a sharing experience that we had. We be lucky to be able to make our festival last year, and this break between one wave and another wave, and then they say, okay, it's open, let's go. And we say, yes, it's now that we gotta be back together again. And we call this edition Reencontros, rejoining. I don't know, it's meaning something in Portuguese, but it's becoming back together again. We thinking on one topic, like, let's be together again. And we made a very beautiful program, and we invite all our guests. They arrive, we'll be very happy. And sadly, in the end, last day of the festival, the next wave restarting. Doom. It's Omicron, I think. Okay, we should close up, and then we had a lot of dancers and professionals came to us and asked, look, okay, you say that we've got a plane that we can catch up tomorrow, but it's possible that we can do our quarantine here in your country. I say, no, this is depend of you. It's not, but we can help you to extend the visa and things like that. And they say only one thing is, if I should work online and do my work in my room in Europe or whatever, I prefer to do here in the beach that I can run, I can be outside and stuff like that. So through all these programs that we make, and the all feedback that we ask ourselves today, why we didn't think about take the people, just go to the beach. Like a break between the festival, we take all the teams and the dancers and professional, and we go to the beach and we go to see animals. It's been such an amazing thing. And we forgot about the performance that we putting in the stage. They're all discussions about excitement to be together in the bus and go to the beach and go to see animals and things like that. I think it's also the impacts of our way to think a festival. It's not to forget that we deal with humans and they've got feelings, they want to experience the things. And most of them, they came often to our festival, but they never had a sense or touch with the country, with the real, what is Maputo, and go out with the sense that I be in Maputo, the sense to be together and caring each other. So just to agree exactly at your point. So in the end, what is the festival and what we do a festival? So our impacts and our perspective is so much to rethinking about what the people that come to us, they're not just artistical machines, not curator has a machine, or we coming to buy and we go, and we just have a few minutes, one day, and leave. But we need a days like tomorrow that you just offer to the group, that we can lose ourselves and take care without timing and be in contact with this land, with the people of here. And also, I would like to share you 3 points that I think it's very important for us to think about. One of them is through all these consequences of the pandemic, we had so much artists and filmmakers. They joined together to reinvent themselves. And we had so great films. I gotta say films because I cannot say it's a video dance or dance video, because these are really films. They went to locations, they hire motors, they hire to make a film together. And now we have these products. And what we do with that? If this product is to put it to the trash, or we integrate in our festival, or we recreate a festival to host this new expression. I don't have an answer, but I would like that we reflect about that. The results, artistical results that they came through this process of pandemic. The other things that I would like to share with you is through this process and through this, all the artists, they went online with mobile phones, with cameras, they went to online. And we had a boom of audience that's normal, is not dance audience. Teenagers, people that never go to see a dance performance, but suddenly the performance in his hand, and he watching the performance. What we do with this audience that they start to get involved into dance through mobile phones, through TVs and stuff like that. So it's also things that I think that we should reflect in it, how we can not take a benefit, but how we can use this chance that this pandemic give to our dance expression, theater, all the disciplines, to have a new audience, how we can bring this audience or to the theater, or continue to fill them with the videos and stuff like that. And for the last, what's one of the impacts of this pandemic for us down there in Africa and Southern Africa? It's more down, more further down. One thing that this is bring for us is to be part of what we call the global world. Through one click, we be shot in Japan, we be shutting in around the world. But obviously, this also is coming with questions. How we can use and we can benefit of be part of this global world through one click for our performance and festivals and things. Sorry, I just threw questions for reflections. And for me, this is the most important, that how we reflect to this, how we respond to that. Because I refuse to be in the position that, I deal just with performing art and with 400 audience and my venue waiting for wave to go out or to no. I think that it's timing to reflect and to rethink and to reposition ourselves and to rethink how we do as a festivals through this experience that this pandemic brings to us. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Master Quito, for those important reflections and questions. They are important, so thank you. And our final speaker, Nayse.
It's a hard act to follow after all of this. So maybe I can make it a bit shorter, because some of the issues that I was going to bring to you, Quito has, as usually, beautifully said. Differently from many parts of the world where the pandemic was an interruption on an otherwise normal life, we were doing Panorama in the context of a country that had a parliamentary coup in 2016 and elected a fascist president in 2018. So our emergency started a bit earlier than the pandemic. Meaning that, for instance, for the first time in all those years that the festival existed, since '92, in 2019, after Bolsonaro went into power in January, we decided not to make the festival that year, and instead I wrote a letter that many people read because it was published around the world, where I said that we were facing this giant hole in the middle of our country, and we didn't feel like we should dance around the hole, but instead look at it. Stop dancing and looking into this hole. And then, because of that letter and because of whatever was happening, we were invited to do an edition of Panorama in Exile. So we did the 2020 edition of my festival in Paris, in the Centre National de la Danse, en Pantin, near Paris. And we did a whole edition that was very political, and was the idea that we could talk about what's happening in Brazil through performance and dance to international audiences, making clear that this exile was real, that we were like representing what was happening in culture in my country, because not only the president, but his election reflected also in regional elections. So we also, at that point in Rio, had this fascist president. We had governor for the region of Rio that said many times on live TV that his purpose was to kill many bandits as he could. So it was kind of this mentality. And the mayor of the city of Rio was an evangelical priest. So for a festival like Panorama that has been known internationally to present very radical work, and for us was not a very good environment to fundraise, because all this public money was not available to us. So we did the festival in exile. And our festival was happening when the pandemic started in Paris. So we were doing the second week of the festival, and then the Ministry of Culture of France decided to close all the venues on the 14th of March, 2020, and we had to cancel the last week. And I rushed to the airport because my fear was to be stuck in France and not be able to go back to my son. So basically I packed in 2 hours and went to the airport and went home. So that was how Panorama was first affected, because we were in exile and then we had to rush back and not happen. And from that moment, what was clear to me is that we were facing multiple levels of emergency, depending on where you lived. And at the first articles that came out when the pandemic was out, and I would read posts and articles of friends, of practitioners, of artists, and I remember seeing many times people use the expression, we are all in the same boat. This is what is going to show that we are all in the same boat. And for me, it was like, bitch, we were never in the same boat. Like, but anyway, so it got me very angry to see how okay it was for many people from the performing arts world, not to mention everything else, but to really pretend that we were all in this together. Like me in my apartment somewhere in Western Europe, and people, you know, in the villages of Brazil, they have the same impact of the pandemic. It got me very angry. And we started talking about what to do, but we couldn't figure out what to do. And of course, in Brazil, as in many places, we started fighting for relief funds for artists. So what's the main struggle? To find ways that people could survive. So some money kind of started emerging, and some foundations were giving money, but it was basically, and I'm telling you a story you already know, was basically like, yeah, I give you €1,000, you do a performance in your living room, and you pay your bills for a month. That was this kind of projects that were like everywhere. And we not only didn't have the funds to do it, we could not do such a thing, because there's nothing to do with what we did as a festival. So in 2020, by the end of 2020, we decided not to do that, but we felt we had to do something. And by we, I mean me, Rafael, and Mario, because we had no crew, because we had no funding. So basically it was the three of us on WhatsApp saying we should do something. And then I started calling artists. And that is a very important thing to remember. And when these things happen, if you had a festival that was about the artists, when you call them, they'll come for you. That's how you know. So I started calling artists and saying, what should we do? And then basically was grief all around us. Brazil had the second highest death rate on COVID after the US. So we knew that, you know, people were dying like flies everywhere. And how could we assess this? We couldn't dance grief. We felt it was... So I had this idea of doing what people could not do at that point. And that has to do also when what Kee Hong was saying was a huge opportunity to think about what was the core business of our festival? What was the core thing that we did? And I kind of realized that one of the most important things that Panorama did in our environment was to do what nobody else was doing. And we went back to that. And what people can't do now, they can't mourn. We couldn't have memorial services at that point. So I had this idea of doing an online memorial service for people. And I had this crazy idea, like all the ones that we have in Panorama, that miraculously came to pass, like the other ones. But I said, what if we stay online, reading books, whatever books we want, because reading books is a performative action that we can do online without losing much of it. So let's read books online, and let's stay online for the number of seconds of deaths that we have now. And that led us to do this project called Panorama Grief, because the word in Portuguese for grief is luto. And luto is the same word for a fight. So in Portuguese, we have this beautiful thing that grief and fight are the same word. So we did this project where I invited people from all over the world, Brazil, and Brazilians living everywhere, Portuguese people a lot, to read online for this number of seconds. So it's something that we had to hold up in the air. And we ended up being online for 51 hours, no, Rafael? So it was a live project of 51 hours on YouTube. And we were reading nonstop for 51 hours from, you cannot imagine the number of people required was like 300 people. But, yeah, we never went off. So one person would follow the other one, like share screens and continue for 51 hours. Rafael did this, this project by himself, basically. We had some people helping, because yes, it's true. But so we did this grief thing, and then quickly, because we have run out of time, so I want to share that this was the first moment I thought what Kee Hong was saying. I said, this is not bad at all. No. This is important what's happening here. We don't do the festival, but we're doing something else that is super important. Yeah. Then when that ended, I said we need now to move into, because that was without any funding. But now, except for the Goethe Institute, they paid for the sign language. But we decided that we should do something for the artists. And we needed, because of the water metaphor that was still bugging me, I finally thought of a concept that we needed an emergency floating device to float on these waters. But our floating device, of course, was not a boat, was a raft. So I created this project called Jangada in Portuguese and Raft in English. And it's a project where we got together people to temporarily flow together and help each other. So the first version of Jangada was from an emergency relief fund that we got locally, and we commissioned 5 local collectives of young artists, mostly peripheral artists, to create short films about how the pandemic was and their relationship to the city. And so these short films exist, and they should be shown. And I think we should start a festival, but then we'll talk about it. So the second part is the one that I'm going to show a 3-minute clip. Is it okay, Mike? Still? So that you can see some artists, because at some point I'm feeling you're seeing too much of curators. You should see artists talking. And so I'll show you the clip. But so the idea of the raft was I called many institutions in the world and said, you normally spend money from your budget to come to my festival to see shows. You cannot do it now, but this money is there in your budget. Give me this money, and let's give that money directly to artists. And by that, we raised 100,000 euro, Rafael, and we gave this money to 10 projects that we selected by Open Call, and they did 10 live projects, either films or live shows. And other 5 projects received research grants to advance in their research, but not to do a film. And this project is something that, for me, takes on 2 aspects before we go to the film. One is that we have to remember that being present is not one only thing. And it goes back to the discussion of 2 days before. This pandemic showed us that the idea of presence can be redefined. And the idea of performing can be redefined. And we have to embrace this possibility instead of acting like many of my colleagues that are now, oh, Nayse, please don't talk to me about online. I cannot do online anymore. And I'm like, well, we should consider doing online forever, in my view. But we have to find out how and what is good for online and what is not. And the second thing is to talk about democratization of the access of our practices and festivals. This collection of artists that were selected to do the Raft project, I think 2/3 of them would never be presented in Panorama otherwise, because they would never be part of our Open Call, because they would not be reached, probably, without the pandemic and the disponibility to go online that we all got to do. And also because when we chose this project, we were not caring about costs, because they costed the same amount regardless of where they lived, of what they were doing. It was not required of us to kind of make a hierarchy of funding. And that goes to the kinship budget that we have to keep talking about. Because of the nature of the project, we were able to reach projects that normally I would say, I cannot do your project because I can't travel 10 people to Rio to perform. But because I had not to travel 10 people, I could give them the money, they could do a film in the middle of nowhere and be shown in the exact same space as a very funded company from the South. So this calls us to attention that the online experience that we have, we should not abandon at all. We should input that into the way that we work with artists and the way we think about budgeting. Yeah. So with that, I'll leave you with a 3-minute clip so you can see it. It's the one that has subtitles in English, so you have an idea.
I want to see as well.
Yeah, they'll show it there, I think. O
Panorama está fazendo esse ano uma edição diferente.
É um festival de 30 anos, né? E essa edição, ela, de fato, teve esse caráter especial, assim, a gente pôde acessar uma série de outros artistas, né?
Descobrir artistas que, muito provavelmente, de outras maneiras, não iríamos descobrir.
E a gente formou um conjunto de instituições que tinham um histórico de colaboração conosco, ou que tinham o desejo de colaborar conosco, para financiar
esses 3 meses de muita intensidade e imersão.
A curadoria é uma escolha. Escolher é um lugar de poder. Tomemos cuidado.
Qual a minha responsabilidade como festival de conhecer aquilo que eu desconheço? Porque existir já existiu.
Qual a insurreição corporal que a cidade provoca em nós hoje?
Como é que a gente faz? Como é que a gente constrói as coisas?
O que é olhar para o Brasil e se perguntar: o que eu posso fazer para que alguma coisa mude nesse país?
Como é isso de dançar também acima de um chão com tantos mortos, né, enterrados.
E aí eu fiquei me perguntando também, assim, né, enquanto preto, favelado, nordestino, assim, e inquieto, né, porque eu circulo, assim, pra onde é que eu vou, assim.
E essa ideia de evaporar o que a gente está vivendo nesse momento, né, nesse corpo que é pós-apocalipse, que é pós o momento difícil que vivemos.
Essa relação do corpo que se expande na maneira de transformar o corpo do outro e com isso tentando também perceber que a gente nunca é só a gente em si.
Como é que tá esse negócio coletivo? Porque é um negócio ousado, é um negócio difícil e é um negócio lindo e potente. Por que é ousado e difícil?
Coreografia que esse negócio gerou nessas casas, nos bairros.
Eu não saberia explicar antes, porque antes não existia.
E aí a gente fecha os olhos e imagina futuros, né? Isso tudo em coexistência, a gente faz isso ao mesmo tempo, sabe?
Sonhar também é uma denúncia. Sim. Porque a gente vai oferecer o oposto do que se vive.
Sei que se trata da maior mobilização indígena desde a Constituinte e que essa agenda inteira tem sido chamada de Primavera Indígena. Eu também sei do fogo que queimou Galdino, Roberta, o Pantanal e a Cinemateca. São fogos diferentes. Estamos do lado de qual fogo?
Como crianças que brincam de incendiar Roma. A gente vai incendiar o mundo.
Great. Thank you so much, and thank you as an audience for your engagement. It's very obvious from where we are sitting that you folk are with us, and we really do appreciate that, because after a big lunch and so on, and the afternoon session, and 3 days of intense stuff, you know, you folk could all like start to sleep. So it's been really good to have you here with us. So folk, we don't have that much time, so this is really about any questions or comments that you might have for our panel. Yes, Elida.
Just kind of a very short kind of validation. So Christine, I really, really appreciate your research and how it is that what time meant to festival organizers during COVID. And just kind of to affirm the fact that like when March, everything kind of shut down and our festival was in October, November, and we actually really did use those almost 9 months, and it was miraculous. Like we thought, okay, so it could happen, it could also not happen. How can we use the online? And it became a very, very kind of fruitful process. Frustrating, but fruitful. So thank you. I think you've kind of created a new understanding of time when things are so pressed and so intense. So yeah, thank you so much.
Can I just add something to that? What was really interesting was something you commented on, and that is the unique situation that people were facing in different countries as well. I think what we did notice is in Canada and the United States, where festivals are often funded by government and very stable governments and have consistent funding, they were guaranteed their funding very early on and told that as long as they used their funding to produce something, they were good to go. So that time, they could worry less about the nitty-gritty details and focused on the more abstract. Our partners in Mexico, it was a very different experience for them, and they didn't have those guarantees. Some of them were able to be funded and so on, but that context mattered so much to the festival organizers.
So I wanted to maybe ask a question, and those of you who'd like to respond, do so. I think that what Quito was saying earlier is true, that what the COVID moment did for us, it showed us the possibilities of reaching much wider audiences. In fact, far beyond our own countries. So we now have international audiences for the work that we do. So a couple of questions come to mind. The first is, what does that do for curating a festival? Now that we used to, before, curate a festival for a local audience, now we have an international audience. How do we curate for both local and international eyes? Secondly, what does it do for sponsors who historically have sponsored you to basically produce a festival to have local eyes on their particular brands? And now, you know, during COVID, you've gone online, you might be reaching a different audience, but not the particular one that they want. What does it do for sponsorship and the like? And then the third question is, you can now reach international audiences, and you might even be able to reach local audiences. But again, from our particular context, Quito, you know that data is very expensive in our country, and most people consume the arts and whatever else through their mobile phones as opposed to through computers or television. So the experience of the arts is not a live one for starters, but it's also a very small screen one. And what does that do then for consuming and consumption of the arts, and how that kind of impacts on people's understanding of the arts in the future? And I suppose the fourth question kind of related to that, and it's something that you were speaking about, Anna. Sorry, I forgot them as well. Is the idea of that the online platform is a venue. And that is very true. But historically, we've also been led to believe, as people involved in theatre and dance in particular, that theatre and dance only exist in the live encounter between those who are on the stage and those in the audience. So that's no longer the case with an online venue kind of experience. And I think it goes back to what someone was saying about, without comedy and there's no laughter, is there comedy? So, and that's the thing, are the very definitions of what we grew up with, are those kind of been thrown into disarray, as it were, and we need to be rethinking our definitions and understandings of these things. So a few questions to kind of just to end the panel, and whoever wants to answer, put up your hands and go for it.
No, please. I have to confess I have forgotten most of the questions.
That's right.
But I'll answer the most recent because I do recall that one. I think what I was excited by was a new type of site specificity for artists, that they were able to choose their own locale and actually go beyond the black box, beyond the proscenium, go to their backyard, go to their neighborhood, into their living rooms to create this work. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that this is an entirely new set of tools and an entirely new way of thinking about the medium. And I think at Fusebox, we really wanted to be cognizant of that and supportive of artists who, were dealing with a global pandemic and were not necessarily ready to pivot, the famous word of our industry at that time, to pivot to new tools. And that it's important to be supportive to where they were at the time. So I think we took the idea of how can we pay artists? How can we compensate them at a time when they need it most? But how can they be creative collaborators to think about not forcing their work into this medium, but actually collaborating with them to talk about what was meaningful for them at that time. And actually, some of them proposed cooking classes. Like, they weren't necessarily thinking about dance having to occur in that place. But I do think it's important to think that there are also a lot of artists who've been working in this venue for a long time that we have to acknowledge as well, that do make dance for this medium, that are thinking critically about it. So I think there's a lot of possibility there, for sure.
What also, just while I remember this myself, the idea of pivoting, I prefer the word pirouetting, it's much more kind of like theatre-ish, dance-ish, but the idea of going online, there was always this understanding, particularly again in our context, of whose responsibility is it to make sure that what is then presented online is of sufficient quality to be able to attract an audience. Because I remember also one of the ateliers that we had, the Edinburgh Festival, they kind of did this research that showed that on average, audiences kind of watched online activity for about 8 minutes. So audiences, who went to the Edinburgh Festival, did not consume what was online for longer than and over the COVID period as well, you know, people were consuming a lot of online content, Netflix, and so the production values of these things were so much more significant than what many artists had the tools and the expertise to be able to present. So it became a question of whose responsibility is it to make sure that creatives have the tools to be able to present. It looks like Kee Hong is wanting to respond.
I think in a way we have to contextualize that all of this is not happening in a vacuum. It's happening in the same situation where I'm going to assume 98% of us are on Instagram and on Instagram Live. It's content on Instagram Live. It's content that the young people and slightly older people are on it 24/7. Yeah? So making work for a screen, for a small screen, is not a new experience. So the question is, what is the relationship of all these other things that's happening at the same time in our lives in relation to the art that is coming out in this moment? There have been many visual artists who have always worked in those mediums long before the pandemic. Yeah? Personally, I really dislike the word pivot.
So pirouette.
Yeah, pirouette, well, because pivot from what to where. Because in many ways, I mean, thank you, Nayse, for sharing your example. This, for me, is a very concrete example of the new radical. The way you can unlock, you know, budgets in ways that was never possible. Calling your mates around the world. I saw the list. It was great. You know? Hello, can you give me your travel budget? And of course, people would say yes. Because we were all also grappling with how are artists and backstage crew getting paid. Because productions were being cancelled, postponed, whatever, right? So in that sense, I kind of feel that, you know, what has emerged out of this is more than just a conversation about form. I think it is a conversation around what is meaningful to us as artists, to our relationship with audiences. And over that 2 years, you know, I mean, I was one of the first adopters of the Fusebox gone online situation because, I mean, they're good friends and I go and, you know, I literally stayed up for 72 hours engaging the festival in a very different time zone, listening to Futures Feminism talking about takeover of World of Warcraft by the fabulous Angela Washko at 4 o'clock in the morning on my bed. But it was stimulating because it was meaningful. I was zoomed into the living rooms of artists cooking. I was zoomed into studios of my artist friends in Sydney talking about the new work that they were doing. Suddenly, we felt a lot more connected than previously was possible. But it also meant that moving forward, we can continue to choose to work in this way, like Nayse says. We choose to not abandon the online just because we had to fucking pivot. We are not pivoting. We're inventing new rules of the game. And I think this is a very powerful position to be in. So that's why we shouldn't forget. Because I also hear a lot of rumblings with other colleagues. Oh, we want to go back. We were waiting to go back to what it was because this is what we are. What we are has moved. The train has left the building, darling. Get with the program, you know?
Yeah. Actually, the boat has left the harbor.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Can I quickly add something, Mike?
Yeah, sure.
Just to add something very quickly. First, I would like to say that the second person I called with the idea of the raft and he's a very clever man and very good friend. And I said, what do you think about it? And he said, I'm in. And also, when you call people, you know who really are the good ones, because the good ones will either immediately say yes to this, or they will say that they can give you more money than you ask. So you just wait and see. And then I sent it to some people. And then one of the partners said yes, but because I sent a WhatsApp message. That's how trustful it was. One of them, I said, I have a plan to raise money to give to artists in Brazil. And he said, I'm in. And I said, don't you want to know what it is? He says, you tell me later. But then another person that I called, he said yes. And then like a week after, he called me and he said, you know what? I'll give you more money. And I said, why? And he said, because we give so much money to people now that don't need. I need to do something more than just give away money because I'm forced to people in my country that already have a lot of money. So let me give you a little bit more. A very important thing about the radicality of projects like this that I think we have to remember is, in this project, for instance, all these people that you saw and people that know, some of these are very important institutions, they gave the money before we even opened the call, because it was very important to me that they had no say in the selection of the projects. So they had no idea which artists they were funding and what they were going to do. They didn't have a say in choosing the artists. The artists were chosen by two Brazilian curators that have nothing to do with any of those institutions. And that is important because that goes back to some of the discussions we had yesterday. We have to take opportunity now to shift some of the post-colonial ideas of funding that we were working on. We have to take this opportunity to say, we'd say no to the logics. We present a new logic, and you can be part of it or not. So this is one thing. And it's just to finish, I think not only we need to rethink the radicality of what we do, but also you are saying about the impact on funding, for instance. And I think it's not harder to fund a project like this than it is to fund anything else, depending on where we are. It's just like, I was making a joke, I think it was one of our colleagues yesterday, I was saying like, pleasing funding, changing a project to please funding is like trying to please someone, dating someone that don't like you. You're making an effort, like you're putting on makeup to date someone that you know don't like you, does not like you. Funding is the same, they don't like you to begin with. So you go there and you demand money from somebody. Don't try to please them too much. So in this sense, the sponsors, I think, will have to adjust to the logics that we present, because if everyone is doing different things, they will have to change also the ways. Hopefully.
Yeah, to agree to disagree. I think that the most important after a project like this, after engagement of artists that you had, after engagement of the audience and a small screen that we had in all the online projects, now it's timing to rethink this. How it can benefit or not to what we call normal, and what we do with this line of projects for the years to come. When we say that now we stop COVID, let's go to panorama, normal. What we do with this project, what we do with this line, what we do with this 400 and something thousand people went online to see 8 minutes of the performance. So it's very important, not just we present our success online, that this is a really success, but for me, the challenge that you bring to us is how we do with that for tomorrow. How?
I wanted to say something.
I want to add
Christine,
to what you're saying, and that is, when we talked to festival founders, directors, artistic directors, they seemed to get the most passionate when they talked about the innovations in their programming that weren't just shifting what they were doing to online, but rather reimagining what they were doing and co-creating with their audiences. And there were some incredible stories about, looking at their festival site and inviting people to go on their own time to festival grounds that were being unused, no performances, but to send in photos of things that, needed to be changed. And then they used that to revise their festival setting so that when they could come back to being in person, it was what audiences were excited about and what the festivals were excited about. And there were a lot of examples like that of not simply transitioning to online, but using online as a mechanism to co-create new experiences.
And I think that maybe what has come out of the panel and some of the discussions that we've had so far is that whereas the festival might be historically a time-limited kind of experience, by virtue of what online has taught us, it shows that we can be doing these things throughout the year and using these different means to package what we have in different kinds of ways to reach very different kinds of audiences. If I see is your hand up? Yes. If's hand is up, and Shamisa's hand is up, and Tobilia's hand is up, and we've run out of time, but go for it. Go Ifa, and then Shamisa, and then... you should have a mic if the person who has the mic got off her WhatsApp. She's on a small screen checking out the art.
Hello. To anyone on the panel, I was just wondering about something else, more about organization and team-wise management. How did you deal, or maybe still are dealing with, keeping your team together in a time of crisis? Were there things you did differently management-wise? How did you deal with maybe mental health issues that maybe occurred among the team? So I was just curious if you have any examples on how to deal with that.
Okay, we're going to take all three questions, and so then folk can answer it as they wish. Shamisa next.
Hi. So I was thinking, in Antwerp, we have also seen the phenomenon that a lot of teenagers are just very difficult to reach. I know we're thinking about everyone's on Instagram, everyone's on TikTok, etc. But I think sometimes we're kind of too old, all of us. I mean, we don't have any Gen Zers or teenagers really in this audience to join this conversation, because art and teenagers, we all know, is kind of educational. You need to invite them. There's a lot of physical work you have to do to get their attention. And I know they weren't watching our video work. I mean, we are, because we were in a need. We are the audience that we're already targeting. But I just know of local youth organizations that really said that they lost a lot of teenagers. They were not hearing from them, they were not seeing them, they were not on WhatsApp in the groups, they were not reacting. So let alone that they not react in the WhatsApp group, now we're trying to invite them to see live streams of several hours. This is not really something happening. Yeah.
Hi, and thank you for this panel. And I feel like my question is so negative, so I'm going to say thank you for all the positivity. And then, and this is simply from the context that I come from. So for anybody who hasn't met me yet, I'm from South Africa. Although as a country we are more supported than most other countries on the African continent in terms of arts and stuff, we found that at this moment, this almost post-COVID moment where everything else is opened up, our arts industry, or at least the performing arts industry, our minister has been completely useless about it. And so a lot of venues have not been able to open because they can only seat 50% of capacity. And as Mike has already mentioned, in Africa, data is such a heavy cost and a heavy burden, and over and above that, resources. So the whole idea of pivoting and pirouetting, although we managed to do it, it was at great burdens to the artists. And I think a lot of people just do want to be in community again. And I'm asking this panel because there's a lot of bullshit and just say no on the panel. How do we think about it in a different way? How do we think, because, I mean, a lot of festivals are trying to open again, but in this light of only being able to only fill your festival to 50%, in the space where you know that like you can't be charging exorbitant prices because you can only fit 50% of the people, and also understanding that now we've grown our audiences to international audiences. So if you saw us online, you're able to come because it's cheaper to travel to South Africa than anywhere else in the world. How do we still engage our local audiences in a meaningful way that doesn't exclude them now that we're in the space where our country almost doesn't want to support the coming back together?
Great. Okay, so to close this panel, each of you will have 2 minutes to respond to whatever you've heard, as well as anything else you'd like, yeah? Starting with Kee Hong and going across to Nayse.
Okay, I will attempt your thing because it was something that I was kind of also working on in Hong Kong. I don't know if I can do it in 2 minutes, but just very briefly, because in whole of 2020, at that time, the organization or the theaters was only open a grand total of 2 months in the entire year. So basically, we were at that time, we were still fighting for the right to be able to use the theater spaces as rehearsal spaces, as whatever spaces, because of the regulations. So after that moment, I was very clear that I didn't want to put myself or artists or audiences in the same situation again. Meaning that, you know, the regulations change like that, and then you have to, you know, respond and failing. So basically, we commissioned 3 sets of artists who were kind of percolating things with each other to respond to really a 3-pronged provocation. One was, you know, are they able to think about their practice that's able to continue, or the work that's able to continue despite whatever happens? Yeah. Second is to think and rethink what we mean by assembly. As we in live performance, what is it about the gathering that is kind of critical? And the third thing was to respond, what is the reimagination of audience agency? So these 3 things for me were very critical in our experience of liveness and performance. And so with that challenge, the 3 sets of artists were very differently. So one re-looked at the idea of telepresence, the idea that, you know, of course through online, but then drawing inspiration from online gaming, for audiences' bodies to be teleported into actual machines that they were building that could travel over space and time, but exist in a real setting. So of course, part of the discussion was drawing reference from a drone bombing, because there is real-world consequences. You're not talking about an abstract virtual setting, but you're affecting things that's happening in real space in real time. And the second set worked on creating a piece of work in the dream space. So literally using research by psychologists about you're able to teach people how to control their dreams. So that there's a series of exercises the audiences would do, and after 2 weeks, the show happens in the audiences as they're sleeping. And the third set was really reimagining the metaverse, the VR. So going back to the idea of tactility and a body material outside of this kind of virtual space that's so common. So basically, they harnessed Facebook's Oculus 2, which is this thing that has a camera inbuilt for safety reasons. So basically, they were challenging the idea of the real and the unreal in using purely because of what the machine was building for safety reasons. So in a way, artists, you'll be surprised by having conversations with them, what they can come up with to reimagine the kind of limitations that we start to grapple with. Just quick examples.
If it's okay with everybody, I'll approach the teenager question as a mother, but not a professor. I have a 13-year-old child who identifies as non-binary, and the pandemic for teenagers was overwhelming. Life shifted in ways that that deeply impact their character, right? They're at key stages of development, and we were asking them to spend all of their time online. And I can say as a mom to my 13-year-old, being engaged in the arts, being asked to create, actually made an entire world of difference. This is a child who spent 2 years of middle school stuck in a bedroom learning because of pandemic restrictions, who didn't have an interest in really rejoining any of the activities they had done before. But because of organizations that deeply wanted to engage kids, this kid is now, I can't get the flute out of their hands. And they're like playing music all the time, making art all the time. And we're super excited because it's Pride Festival in our city this weekend, and it's our kids who are leading the way and wanting us to get out and go do these things. And so I think invitations to participate in creation is maybe the way forward rather than engaging them online more. So that's a mom's perspective.
I would definitely echo what Kee Hong said about looking to artists to imagine the impossible. To go back to, I think, one of the earlier questions about how we were extending care during those sort of early moments of the pandemic, I know from the perspective of Fusebox, we were a tiny team of 4 to 5 people year-round, so we were always perceived as being a lot bigger than we were, but we're working our butts off. But then when it came to festival time, we were bringing on upwards of 100 contract employees, and when we made the decision to cancel our festival, we made the decision to pay all of those people in full, even though they were not working on the festival. So I think it was very important for us to recognize that we were working in a city of festivals where these folks rely completely on the economy of festival in order to pay the bills. And so that was a very crucial thing at that time. And I think, we benefited a lot from a lot of emergency funding from the US, pandemic-related funding. And so we're able to keep our staff employed. But I think from a mental health perspective, it was so important just at a very human level to start every meeting with a check-in to ask how we were doing and to speak from a personal perspective and to say where we were at, because certainly the US had an incredibly high death toll. Texas, which was the state we were operating in, it was really a battle with the governor there to keep people safe. And it was certainly a time that was traumatizing a lot of people in a number of ways, so we really had to extend care to each other and to the crew that we worked with and to the artists that we worked with, because everyone was feeling it in myriad ways. So anyway, I'll leave it there, but I think care was built into our work in a way that we hadn't yet done before and was crucial.
Yes, caring. We also we experienced the same situation about caring each other. Like, I think that one thing that I can say about caring is I be able to know my team. I've been working with them more than 10 years, but during the pandemic, it be the time that I'm ashamed to say this, but I really sit down and look to the eyes and be able to sharing our really deep conversations that normal. We didn't have this time to really talk everything, nothing about work, nothing about audience, not about technical, not about just sharing moments and sharing a space. To your question about the cost of digital for us, yes, it's true, but these few audience that they're able to be online, it's our questions today that they have a money to be online. How we can benefit for them to push them or to the theater or to make a content with them. One great experience that we had, according to team, according to work, use a little bit your experience to use the connections of people that we have as a festival to sell the content that the artists that be produce in our local frame, like to use the platform of our festival to send for all over the festival that they are partners or not. Your festival actually is one one important buyers of our content. So we be able to do this with your festival and the other different festivals in the world to get as a channel to amplify the work that they be doing in our local ground and our local context. So it's be more how we use the platform to reach you. Yeah, thank you.
I don't know how to answer that. I mean, it's, in terms of keeping the team, in our case, the good and the bad was that we had lost our team before the pandemic. So we didn't, I mean, it was just me and Rafael cannot leave because, he knows I'll kill him, so no. No, but just to say that you can ask him, you better ask him why he stayed, but I think it was, you have to understand how domestic it came back to be, because Panorama at some point was able to have like, I don't know, dozens of people in the office and this huge, structure. And we went back to having nothing and giving up the space and whatever. So for you to have an idea, everything we did in the last 2 years was broadcast from my living room, because my internet is a little bit better than at the building he lives, and it's Rafael operating the computer from my living room, basically, what is happening. So that's easy to kind of care because we know each other for 15 years. And Mario, that works with us in the communication, is the same case. So for us, this was not really like an immediate question, but I think the question of how you get people to access the content was, because some of the artists that you saw in the video, for instance, they did not have access to very fast connection. So in itself, it was an issue. How do we make them part of the conversation if they don't have the same quality of connection in other parts of the country? So that's just to address your issue. But I think we have to think about this as a constitutive part of what we do. And that's another inequality that we have to face, depending on where we are. And for each, my learning that I have to share with you is for each problem you have to find a different solution. And it seems like a coach, no? This coach from Instagram. No, but it's true. Like maybe you have to find specific funding to pay for hours of data for your audience. I don't know. Something specific to your need that you have to find.
Yeah, so I was just going to maybe use this, if you don't mind, by talking a little bit about my own experience. First of all, you were talking about the pandemic of inequality, something we've been speaking about all of this time, and this is why we have this particular title. It's the new abnormal, because what we've had is the pandemic of inequality. If we had normalized what we had before in future and call it the new normal, which is kind of the term that we've been using, then we'd be in a very sorry space. So if we have anything new, it's going to be the new abnormal, unless we come to a point, and the vision that Emily was articulating this morning, where social justice kind of prevails and a different kind of paradigm prevails in our experience and the like. And you're completely right. I mean, I've heard that metaphor before as well, that we're in the same boat, we're in the same boat. Actually, we might be in the same storm, but we're experiencing and navigating that storm in fundamentally different ways, depending on whether we are in a cruise liner or whether we have a billionaire yacht from Russia or whether we're in a raft. And I think that the experience that some of us had in South Africa, I work as a playwright, and some of the companies that were doing some of my plays, I didn't have any financial investment in them. They were just doing them and gave them permission to do so. Then COVID struck, and they lost their ability to earn any kind of income. I said to them, don't worry, I'll go along to my database of people who've come to see my plays in the past. I'll raise money from them in lieu of tickets for when the pandemic ends in 4 months' time. So that, in 4 months' time, when there's no more COVID, we'll have money and they'll be able to go and watch your plays. But in the meantime, I'll have a kitty of cash that I'll be able to support you with. So when you have problems with data or with rent, you can come along and and that's kind of what happened. People were incredibly generous initially, as per your experience. And so I was able to support people through that, but then it became clear that the whole sector was devastated by the pandemic, and people were just not able to earn a livelihood. And some of us came together and said, it's clear that government is not our ally. And we're in this on our own. We're on this raft together. So rather than bemoan our fate, let's do something about it. And that's when we started this thing called the Sustaining Theatre and Dance Foundation, the STAN Foundation. And we went along to some people who had kind of made it in the industry, as well as other big patrons of the arts, and said to them, give us like maybe equivalent of $1,000 as initial capital, and we use that to leverage money from other kind of sources, an embassy here, Business and Arts South Africa there, and then use that to initiate a whole bunch of projects like running and mentoring 7 new young stand-up comics, women stand-up comics, doing online choreographers, supporting them, and just doing a whole range of things. And so trying to use, and what has come out of that as well is that we said, look, we're not an advocacy organization, but the sector really needs advocacy. So we initiated, as the STAN Foundation, the Theatre and Dance Alliance. Acronym is TADA. Exactly. and so yeah, Theatre and Dance Alliance. And so this organization has been able to, from having been initiated last year in March, be representing the dance and theatre sector in forums where they are making decisions about COVID and how COVID regulations need to be changed. And without having a body to represent the sector, we as a sector would be absent. We haven't achieved what we want to in terms of eliminating the 50% regulation, but at least we're a voice there and we are able to engage with decision makers. But what has also happened and come out of that is that the Department of Arts and Culture, our very useless minister, as Tobile has said, initiated this to draft a new policy for theatre and dance. And we, as the STAN Foundation and the Theatre and Dance Alliance, had a whole proposal about a new vision for theatre and dance in the country. So we got to be part of drafting that particular policy, which now kind of exists as a draft, an official draft, so that there's the potential to really change the old normal into the old abnormal into a new kind of thing. So telling you the story is simply to say that, as Kee Hong was saying earlier, it's not only about the negative. There have been things that have come out of the last 2 years which are very, very positive. And that's, I think, something to take away from this particular panel. So please join me in saying thank you to this panel for their excellent contributions. Okay. So